The sound of shattering glass snapped the air like a gunshot, cutting through the chatter and laughter. For a split second, the entire backyard froze, everyone's gaze swinging toward the source of the noise, me, standing there with shards of a broken beer bottle at my feet, my hand trembling as the remains of the neck dangled between my fingers. I hadn't dropped it by accident. I'd squeezed it too hard. Lauren's laughter was the loudest. Sharp. Mocking. It sliced right through the silence. She leaned against the patio railing, a plastic cup in hand, smirking as her clique of friends turned their amused eyes on me. "Well, I guess that's one way to make an exit, huh?" she drawled, her words dripping with condescension. The crowd erupted into nervous chuckles, the kind people use to cover their discomfort. Except Lauren and her friends, they were reveling in it. I felt heat creep up my neck, the humiliation squeezing my throat. But it wasn't just their laughter. It was something else, something in her voice, in the way her eyes lingered on me, challenging me to do something, anything. "You okay there, Jason?" one of her friends, Amy, called out, her tone saccharine and fake. "Looks like you've had one too many already." They were goading me, trying to see if I'd snap. I stared at them, the shattered bottle still in my grip. I could feel the stares of the other guests, the pity mixed with curiosity. But then I saw Ethan. He wasn't looking at me like everyone else. His face wasn't amused or horrified or even pitying. No, my son's expression was something different entirely. It was fear. "Dad," he said, his voice low but urgent as he approached. He didn't care about the crowd or the scene unfolding. His eyes flicked toward Lauren, and for the first time, I noticed the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands balled into fists at his sides. He tugged at my sleeve. "Come inside. Now." "Ethan," I started, but he cut me off. "Now, Dad." There was something in his tone that chilled me, an edge I hadn't heard before. He didn't wait for me to respond, just turned on his heel and walked toward the house, his shoulders stiff. Lauren's laughter followed me as I moved to follow him. "Don't let him get you all worked up, Jason," she called out. "He's just being dramatic, like father, like son." The jab landed, but I didn't stop. Inside, the noise from the backyard faded, replaced by an eerie silence as Ethan led me into the den and closed the door behind us. He paced for a moment, his hands running through his hair like he was trying to figure out where to start. "Ethan, what is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He stopped pacing and faced me, his eyes blazing. "I didn't want to do this. I've been holding it in because I thought it wasn't my place, but... Dad, you need to know. You have to know." "Know what?" I demanded, the tension in my chest tightening like a vice. "Mom," he spat the word like it was poison, "she's been lying to you. 4 months. Maybe longer. And it's not just the cheating, Dad. It's worse." My stomach dropped. The room felt too small, the air too thick. "Ethan, what are you talking about? What do you mean, worse?" He hesitated, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I heard her. I overheard her talking to Amy last week when she thought I wasn't home. They were laughing about you, about how easy it's been to..." He trailed off, his hands clenching at his sides. "To what?" I pressed, my voice rising despite myself. "To rip you off, Dad. To destroy you." The words hit me like a freight train. I stared at him, my mind reeling. "Ethan, that doesn't make sense. What are you saying?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She's been funneling money out of your accounts. Amy's helping her. They've been planning this for months, some kind of... I don't know, scheme to take everything. She's leaving you, Dad. She's just waiting for the right time to pull the trigger." I couldn't breathe. My knees threatened to give out as the weight of his words sank in. Ethan wasn't finished. "And that's not all," he said, his voice shaking now. "She doesn't care what happens to us, to me, to you. She said it herself. She called it collateral damage." The room spun, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. But then something else began to rise in me, something darker. Rage. Not the hot, impulsive kind, but something colder. More controlled. Ethan was watching me carefully, waiting for my response. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He nodded. I've got proof. What proof? He pulled out his phone and swiped through it before handing it to me. Audio. I recorded her. You need to hear it. My hand shook as I took the phone, the implications of what I was about to hear settling over me like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just betrayal. This was annihilation. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The recording played through the phone's tinny speaker, but the words were clear enough to cut through the air like shards of broken glass. Lauren's voice was unmistakable. Jason's too busy playing the dutiful husband to notice anything, she said, laughing. He doesn't even look at the bank statements. I've been funneling money out for months, and he's just clueless. Amy's voice chimed in. What if he finds out? I mean, he's not stupid, is he? Lauren scoffed. Stupid enough. Besides, I've got everything planned. The accounts are in my name now, and I've been documenting his neglect. A good lawyer will spin it so I walk away with everything. And Ethan? Oh, he'll side with me, he's a kid. What choice does he have? The sound of their laughter hit me like a tidal wave. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. But then Lauren's tone changed, growing colder, more calculating. And if Jason tries to fight back, she said, her voice dripping with venom, I'll make sure he regrets it. I've got enough dirt to bury him. The recording ended with a beep, but the silence that followed felt deafening. I stood there, the phone in my hand, my body trembling, not from fear, but from the cold, calculated rage boiling beneath the surface. Ethan stood across from me, his jaw tight, his fists clenched at his sides. I told you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to do, Dad. I didn't want to believe it, but after hearing this, I had to tell you. I nodded, the storm inside me raging too violently to speak just yet. I set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. She's not just leaving you, Ethan continued. She's trying to destroy you. The words hung in the air, and suddenly, everything fell into place. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the smug looks she'd been giving me lately, it all added up. I didn't say anything for a long moment, staring at the floor, my mind racing. Finally, I looked up at Ethan. You did the right thing telling me, I said, my voice steady now. I'm proud of you for that. His eyes softened, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. What are you going to do, Dad? I exhaled slowly, a grim determination settling over me. I'm going to fight back. Good, he said, his voice firm. Because she's not expecting it. She thinks you're just going to roll over and let her win. That was the moment I decided. No more standing on the sidelines, no more playing the fool. Lauren wanted a fight. She was about to get one. But first, I needed more information. I needed to know exactly what she'd done, who she was working with, and how far this plan of hers went. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. Ethan and I sat down together, his phone on the table between us. Do you know anything else? I asked. Anything about this plan she's been talking about? He hesitated. I think she's been meeting with someone, he said. Not just Amy. A guy. I don't know his name, but I heard her mention a partner once. It sounded like he's the one helping her with the money stuff. A partner. The word sent a fresh wave of anger through me. It wasn't enough that she had Amy in her corner, now there was someone else pulling the strings. Okay, I said, keeping my voice calm for Ethan's sake. We'll figure it out. But first, I need you to keep acting like you don't know anything. Can you do that? He nodded, though I could see the reluctance in his eyes. Yeah. I can do that. Good, I said. Because if she thinks we're onto her, she'll change her plans. And I need her to think she's still in control. Ethan's expression hardened. She doesn't deserve to get away with this, Dad. She doesn't deserve us. He was right. And as I sat there, the wheels already turning in my head, I knew one thing for certain, Lauren was about to find out what happens when you push a man too far. The game had just begun, and this time, I wasn't playing to lose. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Lauren's plan to humiliate and dismantle me had been brewing for months, maybe longer, but she had made one crucial mistake: she underestimated me. She was already in the kitchen, humming a tune, her back to me as she flipped through her phone. Ethan's words and that recording played on a loop in my head, but I forced myself to act as though nothing had changed. If I tipped my hand too early, it would all fall apart. "Morning," I said, my voice even. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable but her tone laced with forced cheer. "Morning. You okay after last night? You seemed a little off." "Off?" She mocked me in front of half the neighborhood, and now she wanted to pretend to care. I clenched my jaw and smiled. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." Her lips curled into a smirk, but she didn't press further. Good. Let her think I was the same pushover she'd been manipulating for years. After breakfast, I set my plan into motion. Step 1, gather proof. Ethan's recording was a start, but I needed more: bank statements, texts, anything that would expose her lies and burn her perfect facade to the ground. I left for work, but instead of heading to the office, I parked in a lot a few blocks away and pulled out my laptop. Over the years, Lauren had gotten sloppy with her secrets. She thought I was oblivious, but I wasn't as clueless as she believed. I knew her passwords, her email, her phone backup, even her private cloud account. Within an hour, I found everything I needed. Emails between her and Amy outlining their exit strategy. Bank transfers to accounts I'd never seen before. Texts to someone named Zach, dripping with flirtation and references to their business partnership. Zach. So, that was her partner. Every file I uncovered felt like another punch to the gut, but I didn't stop. The more I dug, the more tangled her web of deceit became. It wasn't just money she was stealing. She'd been forging my signature on documents, lying to friends and family about our finances, and planting the seeds to make me look like the bad guy when everything came crashing down. By the time I finished, my laptop was full of evidence, but the rage simmering in my chest had morphed into something colder. Controlled. When I got home that evening, Lauren was on the phone, her voice low but sharp. "Yeah, he doesn't suspect a thing," she said, pacing the living room. "No, Zach, I told you, it's all under control. We just have to stick to the timeline. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late." She laughed, a sound so venomous it made my skin crawl. I stood in the doorway, watching her, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years: power. She didn't know I was standing there, didn't know that I had already unraveled her entire scheme. When she finally noticed me, she froze for half a second before plastering on her fake smile. "Oh, hey, honey. I was just talking to Amy about her dog." Her lies came so easily, like breathing. I smiled back, forcing myself to stay calm. "That's nice. I'm going to head to the garage for a bit. Need to fix the lawnmower." She waved me off, already turning back to her phone. Sure. In the garage, I called Ethan. He picked up on the first ring. "Dad?" "It's worse than we thought," I said, keeping my voice low. "But I've got everything I need to expose her. Tonight, we take the next step." There was a pause, then Ethan's voice came through, steady and determined. "What do you need me to do?" I told him my plan, laying it out in careful detail. Ethan didn't hesitate, agreeing to every part of it. When I hung up, I took a deep breath and let the anger fuel me. Lauren wanted to destroy me, but she forgot one thing: I was no longer the man she thought she could control. And by the time I was done, she would regret ever underestimating me. That evening, the tension in the house was palpable. Lauren moved around like nothing was wrong, her usual smugness painted across her face. She had no idea that the ground beneath her was beginning to crumble. Ethan and I exchanged a glance over dinner, a silent understanding passing between us. The calm before the storm. "Ethan," Lauren said, her tone sweet but insincere, "did you finish your homework? You've been spending a lot of time with your dad lately. Don't let him distract you from school." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Don't worry, Mom. I've got it under control." "Good," she said, sipping her wine. "You know I only want the best for you." The hypocrisy was enough to make me sick, but I kept my expression neutral. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing she was getting to me. After dinner, Lauren retreated to the living room with her laptop. It was part of her routine, pretending to catch up on work while she schemed behind my back. Tonight, I let her believe everything was as it always had been. But behind the scenes, the plan was already in motion. Ethan was upstairs, sending out emails from a private account I'd set up earlier that day. The recipients? Lauren's closest friends, a few family members, and, most importantly, her so-called partner, Zach. Each email contained snippets of the evidence I'd gathered, screenshots of her texts, bank statements, and even parts of the recording Ethan had captured. The subject line was simple, the truth about Lauren. But it didn't end there. I had another surprise waiting for her. At exactly 9 p.m., I connected my laptop to the smart TV in the living room. Lauren barely looked up as I walked in, her focus glued to her laptop screen. "Jason, do you mind?" "I'm working," she said, not even bothering to hide her irritation. "I think you'll want to see this," I replied, my voice steady. She frowned, finally glancing up. Before she could say anything else, the TV flickered to life, displaying a familiar screen, her email inbox. Her confusion turned to panic as I navigated to one of the incriminating emails. The audio recording played first, her own voice filling the room. "Jason's too busy playing the dutiful husband to notice anything. I've been funneling money out for months." Her face went pale. "Turn that off," she snapped, her voice sharp. I didn't move. The next part of the recording played, the one where she laughed about taking everything and leaving me with nothing. "Jason," I said, "turn it off," she shouted, standing now, her eyes wide with fury. "You don't get to make demands anymore, Lauren," I said, my voice cold. "Not after what you've done." Her hands trembled as she slammed her laptop shut. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted, stepping closer. "I understand that you've been lying to me, stealing from me, planning to ruin me. And I understand that you thought I'd just roll over and let you win." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "Save it. I've already sent the evidence to everyone who matters. Your friends, your family, hell, even Zach. You know, your partner." Her face twisted in shock and anger. "You don't know what you've done, Jason." "No, Lauren," I said, my voice rising. "You don't know what you've done. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed Ethan. You thought he'd take your side, but you were wrong." Her gaze flicked toward the stairs, where Ethan was now standing, his expression cold and unyielding. "Ethan," she said, her tone desperate. "You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," he shot back, his voice steady. "I heard everything, Mom. I saw everything. And I'm done pretending you're someone you're not." She staggered back as if he'd physically struck her, her eyes darting between the two of us. "You've ruined everything," she hissed, her mask slipping completely. "You think you've won. This isn't over." I stepped closer, my voice low and firm. "Oh, it's over, Lauren. You just don't realize it yet. By the time you do, you'll have nothing left." Her face twisted with rage, but she had no comeback. She grabbed her laptop and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Ethan and I stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. "You did good, kid," I said finally, placing a hand on his shoulder. "So did you," he replied, his voice soft but steady. But it wasn't over yet. I knew Lauren would try to fight back, to claw her way out of the hole she'd dug for herself. But I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. And I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. Lauren didn't waste time. By the next morning, she was already on the offensive. I woke up to find her in the kitchen, her phone glued to her ear as she paced back and forth, her tone sharp and furious. "No, Amy, listen to me, he's bluffing. He doesn't have anything solid," she hissed, unaware I was standing in the doorway. "Yeah, Zach's panicking, but he's always been spineless. I'll handle it." "I'll." "No, Amy, shut up and let me think." She hung up and spun around, freezing when she saw me. For a split second, there was something in her eyes, fear, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She straightened her shoulders, her mask slipping back into place. "You think this little stunt of yours is going to work," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, and smiled. "Oh, it's already working, Lauren. How's Zach holding up? Sounded like he's not taking this too well." Her jaw tightened. "You're pathetic, Jason. You've always been pathetic. That's why this marriage failed, because you couldn't handle a woman like me." I let her words roll off me, the venom behind them weaker than it used to be. She was grasping at straws now, trying to regain control. "You can keep telling yourself that," I said, stepping closer, my tone calm but firm. "But we both know the truth. You're scrambling because for the first time, you're not the one calling the shots." Her eyes narrowed. "You think this is over? You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Neither do you," I said, meeting her glare with one of my own. She stormed out, slamming the front door behind her, and I allowed myself a small, satisfied exhale. She was unraveling, and it was only a matter of time before she made her next move. That afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer. I'd sent him all the evidence Ethan and I had gathered, and he'd wasted no time building a case. "Jason," he said, his tone brisk, "this is one of the cleanest cases of marital fraud I've ever seen. If she tries to fight you, she'll lose, and lose big. I'm filing an emergency motion to freeze the accounts she's been funneling money into. By the end of the day, she won't be able to touch a cent." "Good," I replied, my grip on the phone tightening. "I want her to feel it. Every bit of it." "Trust me, she will," he said. "But be prepared, women like her don't go down quietly." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, the weight on my shoulders slightly lighter. The financial battle was only one part of this war, but it was a critical one. Without her secret stash, Lauren's options would shrink rapidly. That evening, Lauren came home later than usual. She walked in with an air of false calm, her expression unreadable as she dropped her keys on the counter and poured herself a glass of wine. "Long day?" I asked, barely looking up from my laptop. She didn't respond, just sipped her wine and stared out the window. For a moment, I thought she might try to play nice, to talk her way out of the corner she'd backed herself into. But then she turned to me, her eyes sharp and cold. "You've frozen the accounts." I didn't bother denying it. "Yeah. I did." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she set her glass down with deliberate care. "Do you really think you've won, Jason? That this little victory means anything?" I stood, closing the laptop and meeting her glare head-on. "Oh, I know I've won. You're just too proud to admit it yet." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low, threatening tone. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. I've spent years building my life, my connections. You think one pathetic man with a grudge can take all of that away?" "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "One man couldn't. But a man with the truth. A son who sees through your lies. A lawyer who knows exactly how to dismantle everything you've built. That's a different story." She flinched at the mention of Ethan, and for the first time, I saw genuine doubt flicker across her face. "You brought this on yourself, Lauren," I said, stepping past her toward the stairs. "Now you get to live with the consequences." As I climbed the steps, I heard her mutter something under her breath. "You'll regret this, Jason." I paused but didn't look back. "The only thing I regret is not seeing you for what you really are sooner." I left her standing there, alone in the kitchen, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was walking away with my head held high. But I knew she wasn't done. Not yet. And I was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, Lauren's car was gone. She hadn't said a word to me before leaving, but the energy she left behind was sharp and volatile. I wasn't sure where she'd gone, but I had my suspicions, and my suspicions were usually right. Ethan joined me in the kitchen, his face tense as he poured himself a glass of orange juice. "She's up to something," he said without preamble. I nodded. "No doubt. But it doesn't matter. The accounts are frozen, and the evidence is already in place. She can't undo that. She's not the kind of person to just give up," Ethan muttered, staring out the window like he was waiting for her to reappear. "She doesn't have to give up," I replied, my tone steady. She just has to lose. It wasn't long before her next move became clear. Around midday, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a smooth male voice greeted me. "Mr. Jason Reynolds." "Speaking," I said cautiously. "This is Zach Henderson. I believe you're already aware of who I am." The name hit me like a hammer. So, he had decided to crawl out from the shadows. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "To propose a truce," Zach said, his tone almost smug. "You've made quite the mess, but we can clean this up together. No need to drag Lauren, or yourself, through the mud any further." I almost laughed. "You think I'm the one who dragged us through the mud? You've got a lot of nerve." "I've got a lot of leverage," he countered smoothly. "You think freezing those accounts was a win? It's temporary, at best. You don't want this to escalate, Jason. I can make it go away quietly." A clean break. The sound of shattering glass snapped the air like a gunshot, cutting through the chatter and laughter. For a split second, the entire backyard froze, everyone's gaze swinging toward the source of the noise, me, standing there with shards of a broken beer bottle at my feet, my hand trembling as the remains of the neck dangled between my fingers. I hadn't dropped it by accident. I'd squeezed it too hard. Lauren's laughter was the loudest. Sharp. Mocking. It sliced right through the silence. She leaned against the patio railing, a plastic cup in hand, smirking as her clique of friends turned their amused eyes on me. "Well, I guess that's one way to make an exit, huh?" she drawled, her words dripping with condescension. The crowd erupted into nervous chuckles, the kind people use to cover their discomfort. Except Lauren and her friends, they were reveling in it. I felt heat creep up my neck, the humiliation squeezing my throat. But it wasn't just their laughter. It was something else, something in her voice, in the way her eyes lingered on me, challenging me to do something, anything. "You okay there, Jason?" one of her friends, Amy, called out, her tone saccharine and fake. "Looks like you've had one too many already." They were goading me, trying to see if I'd snap. I stared at them, the shattered bottle still in my grip. I could feel the stares of the other guests, the pity mixed with curiosity. But then I saw Ethan. He wasn't looking at me like everyone else. His face wasn't amused or horrified or even pitying. No, my son's expression was something different entirely. It was fear. "Dad," he said, his voice low but urgent as he approached. He didn't care about the crowd or the scene unfolding. His eyes flicked toward Lauren, and for the first time, I noticed the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands balled into fists at his sides. He tugged at my sleeve. "Come inside. Now." "Ethan," I started, but he cut me off. "Now, Dad." There was something in his tone that chilled me, an edge I hadn't heard before. He didn't wait for me to respond, just turned on his heel and walked toward the house, his shoulders stiff. Lauren's laughter followed me as I moved to follow him. "Don't let him get you all worked up, Jason," she called out. "He's just being dramatic, like father, like son." The jab landed, but I didn't stop. Inside, the noise from the backyard faded, replaced by an eerie silence as Ethan led me into the den and closed the door behind us. He paced for a moment, his hands running through his hair like he was trying to figure out where to start. "Ethan, what is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He stopped pacing and faced me, his eyes blazing. "I didn't want to do this. I've been holding it in because I thought it wasn't my place, but... Dad, you need to know. You have to know." "Know what?" I demanded, the tension in my chest tightening like a vice. "Mom," he spat the word like it was poison, "she's been lying to you. 4 months. The day Lauren's world collapsed was a quiet one. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic outbursts, just the slow, inevitable unraveling of everything she had built on lies and deceit. And by the end of it, she was left with nothing. It started with a court order. My lawyer had moved fast, leveraging the evidence to secure an expedited hearing. Lauren didn't even bother to show up, but the outcome was predictable. The accounts she'd funneled money into were seized, and the house was legally designated as mine. The next blow came from Zach. He hadn't been as loyal as she'd thought. After realizing the walls were closing in, he flipped, providing a detailed statement that not only implicated Lauren in financial fraud but revealed his own involvement in the scheme. He cut a deal to save himself, leaving her completely exposed. By the time the police arrived at the house to serve her with papers for fraud and forgery, Lauren was sitting in the living room, sipping wine like it was just another Tuesday. When they asked her to come with them, she didn't resist. She simply stood, set her glass down, and walked out with a chilling calmness that sent a shiver down my spine. Even in defeat, she carried herself like she was untouchable. But she wasn't. Not anymore. A week later, Ethan and I sat on the back deck, watching the sunset. The air was still, the kind of quiet that settles after a storm. The house felt different now, lighter, as if the weight of Lauren's toxicity had been physically lifted. "You think she'll try to come back?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. I shook my head. "She won't have the chance. She's facing too many charges, and even if she didn't, she burned every bridge she had." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think people like her ever regret it? What they've done?" I considered the question for a moment. Regret? Maybe. But not in the way we think. People like Lauren don't regret their actions. They regret losing. There's a difference. Ethan leaned back, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I'm glad she's gone. I just wish it didn't have to end this way." "Me too," I admitted. "But sometimes the only way to fix something broken is to let it fall apart completely." We sat in silence for a while longer, the only sound the distant rustle of trees in the evening breeze. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Lauren's downfall became the talk of the town. Her friends, once her greatest enablers, turned on her, distancing themselves from the scandal. Amy was quick to erase all traces of their connection, going so far as to block Lauren on social media. Zach vanished entirely, likely trying to rebuild his life in another city. As for Lauren, her once flawless reputation was in tatters. The woman who had thrived on manipulation and power found herself alone, stripped of the control she had wielded so ruthlessly. The last I heard, she had moved in with a distant relative in a neighboring state, fighting a legal battle that she was destined to lose. Months later, as Ethan and I settled into our new routine, I found myself reflecting on everything we'd been through. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, it had all been devastating. But in the end, it had also been liberating. I wasn't the man I used to be. I wasn't the blind, complacent husband Lauren had taken for granted. I had faced the worst and come out stronger, with my son by my side. And as I looked around at the life we were rebuilding together, I realized something important. Lauren's betrayal had broken me, but it had also freed me. And for that, I was grateful. It was time to start over. Time to move forward. And this time, there was no looking back. The day of the final confrontation arrived like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and unstoppable. Lauren had been backed into a corner, and I knew she was planning something desperate. She couldn't accept defeat, not after the life she'd so carefully crafted was exposed as a lie. Ethan and I had prepared for this. We had a backup of every piece of evidence, every recording, every bank statement. My lawyer was on standby, ready to act if she made even the slightest move against us. That evening, Lauren called for a family meeting. Her tone was calm, almost too calm, as she stood in the living room with her arms crossed, her face a mask of defiance. "Jason, Ethan," she began, her voice measured, "we've been through a lot recently. But this doesn't have to end in destruction. We can find a way to move forward, peacefully." I raised an eyebrow, not bothering to hide my skepticism. "Peacefully? Is that what you call stealing from your family and plotting to destroy me?" Her eyes flicked to Ethan, but he didn't flinch. He stood by my side, his expression hard and unyielding. "I made mistakes," she admitted, though her tone lacked any real remorse. "But we can still come to an agreement. If you back off, if you stop this crusade of yours, I'll let you keep the house, Jason. And Ethan, I won't fight for custody. You can stay with your father if that's what you want." Ethan scoffed. "You're not letting us do anything. We're done with you, Mom." Lauren's mask cracked for a split second, her jaw tightening as she turned her attention back to me. "Jason, think about what you're doing. If you take this to court, it'll get ugly. For all of us. It's already ugly, I said, my voice cold. Because of you. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. You think you've won, don't you? You think you're the hero in all of this. But you have no idea what I'm capable of. I didn't move, didn't break eye contact. I know exactly what you're capable of, Lauren. That's why this ends now. Her composure shattered. You're pathetic, she spat. You always have been. You're nothing without me. I pulled out my phone, pressing play on the final recording, a conversation between her and Zach that Ethan had captured without her knowledge. Jason doesn't stand a chance, her voice rang out. By the time I'm done, he'll be begging me to leave him with something. Her face turned white as the recording continued, Zach's voice chiming in. What about Ethan? You think he'll side with you? Lauren laughed in the recording, a cold, heartless sound. He's just a kid. I'll manipulate him like I always do. I stopped the recording and slid the phone back into my pocket. I think we're done here. She stared at me, her expression shifting from fury to desperation. Jason, you don't have to do this. We can fix this. For Ethan's sake. Ethan stepped forward, his voice clear and unwavering. We don't need you to fix anything, Mom. We're better off without you. Lauren's shoulders sagged, her defiance draining away as reality set in. She was out of moves, out of power, and for the first time, out of control. I'll see you in court, she said finally, her voice hollow. No, you won't, I replied. Because by the time this is over, you won't have the resources to fight me. And you won't have Zach either, I sent him everything. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. You didn't. I smiled, cold and victorious. Oh, I did. He knows you've been siphoning money from his accounts too. Looks like you underestimated him as much as you underestimated me. Lauren's face crumbled, and for the first time, she was truly speechless. Ethan and I walked out of the room together, leaving her behind in the wreckage of the life she tried to destroy. The court proceedings were swift and decisive. With the evidence I had, Lauren had no choice but to agree to a settlement that left her with almost nothing. Zach, true to form, cut ties with her the moment he realized she betrayed him too. Ethan and I moved on, rebuilding our lives without her shadow looming over us. The house felt lighter, freer, like a weight had been lifted from its walls. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Ethan turned to me. You did it, Dad. You fought back. I nodded, a sense of peace settling over me for the first time in years. We did it, Ethan. Together. Lauren had tried to tear us apart, but in the end, she only made us stronger. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew we were finally free. Weeks turned into months, and the dust began to settle. Lauren was gone, physically, emotionally, and legally. The court had finalized everything in record time, thanks to the overwhelming evidence stacked against her. She left with barely enough to cover her own expenses, while I retained the house, custody of Ethan, and the satisfaction of knowing she had no way to rebuild the web of lies she'd lived in for years. But her departure wasn't quiet. Lauren tried one last stunt before disappearing completely. A week after the court's decision, a letter arrived in the mail, addressed to me. The handwriting was hers, sharp and deliberate, a mockery of the polished image she always tried to maintain. The letter was brief, but its venom seeped through every word. You might think you've won, Jason, but this isn't over. You'll always be the small, pathetic man who couldn't keep me. One day, Ethan will see through your lies, just like I did. Enjoy your hollow victory while it lasts. I stared at the letter for a long time, the rage threatening to bubble up again. But as I read it a second time, I felt something unexpected, pity. Lauren was grasping at nothing, her words a final, desperate attempt to claw at my sanity. But she no longer held that power. Without a second thought, I tossed the letter into the fireplace, watching the flames consume it. The satisfaction I felt wasn't just about defeating her, it was about moving forward. She could try to haunt me, but I was no longer the man she had manipulated and broken. Ethan saw me burning the letter when he came into the room. Was it her? He asked, his voice calm but curious. Yeah, I replied. But it doesn't matter. She's just trying to get under my skin. He nodded, sitting down across from me. She's not coming back, is she? No, I said firmly. Not this time. Ethan seemed to relax, his shoulders losing the tension they'd carried for so long. Good, he said. Because we're better off without her. Life didn't magically fix itself overnight, but the absence of Lauren brought a clarity and freedom I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Ethan and I started new routines, building a home that felt more real than it ever had when she was there. He joined the basketball team at school, and I made it to every game, cheering louder than anyone else in the stands. At work, I threw myself into projects I'd neglected for too long, regaining the confidence Lauren had eroded over the years. One evening, after a long day, Ethan came into the living room with a hesitant smile on his face. "Hey, Dad," he said. "I've been thinking." "About what?" I asked, setting my book aside. "About how everything went down. About her." He hesitated, then added, "I'm glad it's just us now. I mean, I know it's not perfect, but it feels honest. Like we don't have to pretend anymore." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so much time fighting to protect him, to shield him from Lauren's toxicity, that I hadn't realized how much he'd been protecting me, too. "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "It's not perfect. But it's ours. And we're going to be okay." Ethan smiled, a real, genuine smile that made me realize just how far we'd come. As I watched him head upstairs, a thought struck me. Lauren had tried to destroy everything, my life, my finances, my relationship with Ethan. But in her attempt to tear us apart, she had only brought us closer together. I'd fought back, and I'd won. Not just for myself, but for my son. And as I sat there in the quiet of our home, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger, wiser, and free. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm that felt almost surreal in its simplicity. For the first time in years, there was no looming shadow, no scheming whispers in the background, no weight of deception pressing on my chest. Lauren was gone, her threats hollow and powerless, and Ethan and I had reclaimed our lives. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and orange, Ethan and I were sitting on the back porch. The air was cool, and the hum of crickets filled the silence. He was flipping through his phone, a faint smile on his face, while I nursed a cup of coffee, letting the warmth seep into my hands. "Dad," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the comfortable quiet. "Do you ever think about her?" I looked at him, considering the question. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not in the way I used to. I don't feel angry anymore. Or hurt. She's just a part of the past now." Ethan nodded, his gaze distant. "I used to think about it all the time. What she did. What it meant. But now, I just feel relieved. Like we finally got out of something we didn't even know we were trapped in." He wasn't wrong. Lauren's betrayal had been like a cancer, slowly eating away at everything good in our lives until there was nothing left but lies and manipulation. Cutting her out had been painful, but it had been necessary. "You know," I said, leaning back in my chair, "I used to think I failed. That I should have seen it coming, or done something to stop it before it got that bad. But now, I see it differently. It wasn't about failing. It was about surviving. And we did that. Together." Ethan glanced at me, his smile returning. "We did," he said simply. The quiet settled over us again, but it was a peaceful silence, the kind that only comes after a storm has passed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, or bracing myself for another betrayal. I was just living. Later that night, as I stood in the kitchen cleaning up, my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen, expecting a work email or maybe a message from a friend. Instead, it was a notification from an unknown number. The message was short. Cryptic. "I hope you're enjoying your victory. But don't forget, I know who you really are." For a moment, the familiar tension crept back into my chest, the old instincts kicking in. But then I laughed, a quiet, disbelieving laugh that echoed in the empty kitchen. Lauren's final, desperate grasp for relevance. She had no power anymore. No leverage. Her games were over, and no empty threats would change that. I deleted the message without replying and turned off my phone, letting it sit face down on the counter. As I walked upstairs, the thought struck me, she would always try to haunt me, in one way or another. But she would never win. I had rebuilt my life. I had my son, my peace, and a future that was finally my own. And no matter how many shadows she tried to cast, they would never touch the light we had found. We were free. And that was all that mattered. Months passed, and life gradually found its rhythm. Ethan and I had rebuilt our world, free from Lauren's shadow. He thrived in school and on his basketball team, while I reclaimed my career and confidence. Lauren's occasional bitter texts or emails were ignored, her threats now powerless. One day, Ethan suggested we take a trip, just the two of us, to mark a fresh start. We packed up and left, exploring quiet towns and vast national parks. On the final night, under a blanket of stars, Ethan said, "I didn't think we'd ever feel free again." "We earned this," I replied. And as we sat by the fire, I knew we weren't just free, we were stronger. Together.